Good evening. My name is Kathleen Olive. Shortly, I'm going to introduce Clive Paget to you, and then we'll get the evening started. But first, I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country because I'm coming to you from Gadigal land. Clive is coming to you from London. But as I'm in Sydney, I thought that I would begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm coming to you from tonight. And I pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be joining us today. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming along. I will stop the screen share so that you can see Clive in all of his glory. Thank you, Clive, for joining us. Clive is joining us, as I said, from London this morning, which is very
Where
kind.
dawn has just broken.
Exactly. It's very early for you. Thank you for getting up so early, Clive.
That's all right. As long as the bags under my eyes don't show
No,
too
they're
much.
nicely they're disguised by your spectacles. That's one of the benefits of specs. I'm sure that those who are attending tonight don't need much of an introduction to you, Clive. I'm sure they're here because they'd love to hear you speak about Handel. But I'd just like to start by saying that, of course, Clive has an extraordinary career as a an arts critic and writer. He is the editor-at-large of Limelight magazine, which is our sister company here at Limelight Arts Travel, and has had a varied career in the performing arts, including time as music theatre consultant to Sir Nicholas Heitner. And also, you're one of the founders of the Bridewell Theatre in London. So we feel very fortunate to be able to have you leading our tours that have a performance focus, but also, obviously, we feel very fortunate to have you here tonight to talk to us about the Handel Festival.
Yes, great to be with you.
Excellent. Okay, so Clive, we thought that we would kind of move from a general chat about Handel and about his place in the Baroque canon and in classical, Western classical music more generally, and then move from talking about Handel to talking specifically about the festival, because of course you're leading a tour for us in June to Halle, the place of Handel's birth, and you're going to be attending the Handel Festival with we've got to count them: one, two, three, four, five, six, seven works by Handel
Yes.
on your performance, and one kind of bonus work that we might have time to talk about as well. So let's start then with Handel. And I thought you've had such a varied career in the performing arts. I thought it would be great to hear from you more specifically about Baroque music. So when you listen to music, when you attend performances of work by composers like Handel, what is it that particularly draws you into his work?
I think the thing about Handel, which you don't find with other Baroque composers, is this extraordinary. I hate the word accessibility, but I think what I mean by that is there's a melodic strength to his writing, and there's also an almost instinctive ability right from the beginning to kind of get to the emotional heart of a character in an opera. So you get this very direct connection to the character's emotions expressed through melodies which are almost immediately memorable. Baroque arias, which, as I'm sure you all know, tend to go in the da capo form, the ABA form, where you get quite often a fairly lengthy A section, a contrasting B section, and then an A section where the singer is meant to decorate it and thrill the audience with their vocal dexterity. And that gives you time. You by the time the A section comes back, you've probably with Handel, you've almost certainly got it before you even begin. So you're not having to remember something like it.
Mm.
It's worked its way into your brain, and so you immediately respond to the music. And I think that, I mean, much as I adore Bach, and Bach wrote many memorable tunes, for Bach, it always feels like it's to do with the orchestral structure, and the voice is a part of that. It's part of the whole texture. With Handel, the orchestral structure is there to support the voice, to support the
Mm.
melody. It's joyous. And I'd also say and this is my thing about Baroque opera. Some people go, oh, 3.5 hours of Baroque opera. It's long, and Directors often go, oh God, 10 minutes, and they've only got 8 lines to sing, and that is going to occupy. What on earth am I going to do with it? Well, I always think the opposite. I always think 10 minutes, that's a luxury. That means you've got a long amount of time, a great amount of time to really think about what it is, what the emotion is, what the
Mm,
character was expressing at that point, which means you can go really, really deep.
mm,
And I often think that the directors who feel, oh, they've stood here for 30 seconds, I'm going to have to move them, kind of thing, aren't necessarily doing the music as a service, because actually the composer's inviting you to really go into the character's
mm,
heart and mind and explore an emotion which which actually, if you spend long enough on it, can turn out to be two or three or four
mm.
different aspects of the same thing. So I just find Handel is the composer who is most consistently able to do that.
We were very lucky in Sydney. I don't know if it traveled. You would know if it traveled, but we were very lucky last year in Sydney to have Pinchcut do the Dublin version of the
Oh
Messiah,
yeah.
and I hadn't
Mhm.
heard it. I hadn't heard the Messiah since childhood, and I'd forgotten how deep he goes into the text in that as well.
Yeah.
The kind of as you say, the breadth of the composition that allowed you to really reflect on all of those prophecies and
Yeah.
such an
Yeah.
extraordinary kind
Oh,
of
look, I mean, he was
comprehensiveness.
despised is just an extraordinary thing. I mean, it's like this just this exploration of Christ's suffering in
Mm,
over a sort of 10-minute span. It's just
mm.
extraordinary.
Yeah. So this is something that characterizes his work in particular. He has a more of a facility for going deep into particularly the characterization in that way.
Yes, and I think what's extraordinary about it as well is that he was German, and particularly by the time you come to the oratorios, he's exploring texts that aren't in his native language. Well,
Yeah.
and the Italian texts aren't either. But he just seems to have an ability to kind of understand the characters, where the character is in the drama at that particular point, and find a tune that is going to allow him to explore that, whether it's a long slow cantabile aria, or whether it's one of these kind of fury arias where you've got 4 minutes of them raving up and down the stave and whopping out extraordinary high notes.
I was really struck by that when preparing for the session tonight because I enjoy Handel's music, but I'm by no means an expert. So I wanted to look at the works that you'll be hearing when you're in Halle on the tour and look at the background of them and kind of get them in my head into a kind of a chronological order of his career. And I was so struck by the diversity of literary texts that were used just in the seven works by Handel that you'll
Yeah,
hear in Halle. He seems to have had a linguistic breadth as well that he can take his inspiration from my count at least three linguistic
yeah.
canons. Is that something that's particular to him as well, moving from Italian to German to English?
No, actually, no. I mean, there's all the composers in that period were expected to be able to. If you were Italian, you stuck to Italian. That's fine. So if you look at Vivaldi or yeah, those composers that would come to there. If you were from the German-speaking countries, and this goes all the way through to Mozart, you
Mm,
were expected to both be able to understand and reassess a
mm,
maybe 100-year-old libretto that had been set by 20 other composers previously in
mm,
Italian, often by Metastasio, the great libretto writer of the era. I mean, there are certain operas. I mean, weirdly, L'Olympiade, which is is a very strange story. Turns out to be the most set libretto of the entire Baroque period, and Handel didn't do one. But
no.
but there are certain things there are certain things that you're expected to kind of know. What's fascinating, I always think about the Germans, and Handel, because he got out of Germany and moved to
Mm,
England, didn't have to go through this, but he did experience it during his time in Hamburg when he was young. Was this strange kind of fusion that had to happen in the German opera houses, where you would get an opera that was in both German and Italian. So
Mm.
the highborn characters would sing in Italian and their arias would be in Italian, but the
Right.
recitative would be in German, so the
German.
people could understand what was the story that was being told. And the comic characters always sung in German, and their songs would be simple, much more simple tunes, drinking songs, anything comic that would get the audience on side. And I find that a fascinating kind of
Mm.
hybrid. You find it in Telemann opera, for example,
Mm.
but Handel escaped that essentially and came to London, where I mean, here's another fascinating thing. If Purcell hadn't died in 1695, there would have been potentially a very strong English opera that was
Mm.
going on in the
Mm.
vernacular in London. But because he did, there was a great sort of vacuum, and
Right.
there was all this kind of tension between people who wanted Italian opera, which they thought was classy and highbrow, and people who wanted something more earthy and English.
Mm.
Hence why you get in 1730, you get the Beggar's Opera, which
Right.
sends up Italian opera as an idea that all of the long arias where people die and all this kind of stuff, and the kind of crazy metaphors and similes which are used in all these arias. It's like if a hero is torn between two lovers, he'll have an aria where he's a bee, or flying from one flower to another. Or whenever someone's, you get the storm and the ship arias whenever someone's emotions are all turbulent and all this kind of stuff. And I think again, what's brilliant about Handel is that despite the fact that a lot of this was very formulaic, and you were
Mm.
expected, if you did an opera, you were expected to have, and you had a prima donna and a primo uomo who was often a castrato,
Mm.
very high ego, high maintenance performers. You had to be absolutely strict. They had 8 arias each, and if they didn't, if one of them felt there was one, the other one had one more, they would come to you and go, "Hey, Signore Handel, she have one more aria than me. I want you to write whatever kind of thing." Or they would actually have one in their back pocket, and they'd say, "I have this, which I sang in Naples last year. I think it will make an absolutely wonderful aria for me to sing in the third act." These suitcase arias that people have.
I was really struck when looking at the different works that you'll be hearing at the festival and where they occurred in his career. I wouldn't expect from Handel's biography that he would have that kind of facility to travel between countries and take on big kind of linguistic projects because his origins in Halle seemed to me to be quite humble.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, his father was a barber surgeon. I mean, it was, and I mean, there are many, many myths around Handel. One of the reasons there are many myths is actually there's very little actual hard and fast evidence. There
Mm.
aren't many letters. So we're left with biographers who come up with these stories about him smuggling a very small harpsichord up to the attic when he was 7 and practicing on it. I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever tried to smuggle a harpsichord into the attic, but it's not the easiest thing for a 7-year-old lad to do, kind of thing. But
On
all
his
these
own.
sort of myths that grow up around about how he actually gets support, his music, his obvious musical talent, and all this kind of stuff. What is remarkable, I think, is about how quickly he learns, well, quickly he decides that he wants to make a career of this, and he knows what a career is,
Mm.
and he knows what that's about. So when he goes to Italy in his late teens, which the biography famously says he went on his own bottom, which means that he self-funded himself. He was sent there by a nobleman who he was attached to. He knew why he was going to Italy. He needed to go to Italy. He needed to learn um, what this was all about, and how the Italians did it, and
Mm.
refine his technique. There's a clear sense of someone with a kind of real focus on a career as he travelled around. That where's my next job?
Mm.
Uh, how will I make money? Because he was very good at money. And he was also good at avoiding the South Sea bubble, for example. You do feel there's a keen business mind there that knows where to put his money and when to take it out
Yes.
in that respect. So it is a fascinating biography when you look at it. I mean, you can't help but feel that when he comes back in 1709 from Venice, where Agrippina is this enormous hit. And the audience is shouting out "Viva il caro Sassone," long live the beautiful Saxon as rotation. I mean, we see him as this very solid looking German with a
Wigged.
big old wig on, but there is a
Yeah.
portrait of him from this period, which was stolen from Halle in the 1940s, I think, in which he does look a rather
Mm,
rakish, handsome young devil, and you get a slightly different picture of him there. But when he comes to he goes to Hanover and gets a job with George, the Elector of Hanover, as a kind of Kapellmeister there. But he only stays there for 6 to 9 months before he decides he's going to go off and visit England. And I think that shows. It's interesting. I just did a Mozart tour to Salzburg, and one of the things you really notice about Mozart, he has this terrible. There's this tension in his entire life. He's learned how exciting opera is. The world of opera is where he wants to be. And when he's stuck in Salzburg, he's in this place where it's choral music for the church, for a rather dull Prince Archbishop who wants that kind of stuff. And you can imagine at the Protestant court of the Elector of Hanover, Handel is
mm,
being faced with the same thing. I want, a celebratory ode for my latest victory in this, that, or the other kind of thing, or I want something for the chapel, or whatever kind of thing, versus this world he's experienced in
mm,
Italy so recently with this exciting opera thing. So when he goes off to England and within a year produces Rinaldo, which is the first
mm,
Italian opera proper to
mm,
be done in London, he's suddenly back in the world that he knows he wants to be in, and that's
mm,
really awesome because a few years later, when Queen Anne dies, but Handel incidentally managed to get a life pension out of Queen Anne because
excellent.
he's always got an eye on the money. And when the Elector of Hanover bizarrely turns out to be George the First of England, it's really tricky for Handel because he comes over as the king, and he's rather you feel he's rather put out because Handel bailed on him rather quickly. You feel there's a couple of years before, you almost feel the water music, which comes in, I think, 1717, or 1719. I can't remember. You feel it's Handel's way of getting back into his good graces. He kind of comes up with brilliant
Yeah,
entertainment music, and the king sort of welcomes Handel back into the fold as I mean, there are fascinating stories which suggest that he might have been sent. Of course, it might all be a double bluff, and he was sent there as a sort of spy
right,
to kind of suss out the lay of the land, meet important politicians through the kind of opera
right.
world, which was funded by these wealthy people who were also involved in politics. There's also that possibility that he was actually sending info back to Hanover. But yeah, fascinating story. I mean, and the great thing about the festival, I think, is that we get Agrippina, the first big hit
Yeah.
that he does. We get the first big hit that he has in London, Rinaldo. We
Ronaldo.
get the first. So in 1719, he founds this thing called the Royal Academy of Music, which
Mm,
nowadays is the second music college in London, but in those days was just a collective of wealthy men who wanted Italian opera, and they basically set it up with Handel as the sort of music director, sent him off to Europe to recruit the best singers and bring them back. And in the first season for the Royal Academy of Music, he produces Giustino, which is another one of the operas that we're going to hear
mm,
there. So we do get plus we get Radamisto, which is one of the great uh, operas of when he's really flourishing as that kind of Italian, and Ariodante, which again is
mm,
seen as possibly one of his most emotionally deep operas.
mm.
And then of course we get two oratorios, both of which come from the 1740s. So
Yeah.
you find out what he turns into.
Yes, and in terms of that, and my cat is going to try and join the session in a moment. She also wants to learn more about Handel. But in terms of the in terms of his biography, when looking at how he'd gone to Italy and worked in Germany, and then had that extraordinary big section of his career in London, I was really, I noticed how extraordinarily flexible but also innovative across genre he was, and, almost single-handedly coming up with new genre. In terms of the biography, do you see that as being connected to primarily to him and the extraordinary artist that he was, or was there something special in the water in London in the 17, 20s to 40s that allowed him to be so innovative?
You know what? It's interesting because actually, and I've kind of talked about his commercial nous before. I mean,
Mm,
when you look at the theatre in the Haymarket where all these operas went on, it was tiny. So it didn't have a lot of, and it was mostly patronised by wealthy people who probably wouldn't pay for it. So the finances of Italian opera production in London were always on a knife edge. And there
mm,
was this rival company, the Opera of the Nobility, which was run by Nicola Porpora, a great singing teacher, and also a very fine opera composer, producing Italian opera, just 100 yards down the road, kind of thing. So there was always this feeling that there was always the possibility of financial disaster if you didn't find the best singers, or a show proved a flop, or and they were poaching each other's star. Castrati, Senesino, the great alto castrato, leaves Handel in a huff for the Opera of the Nobility at one point, only to come back again later. You can feel this kind of febrile thing going on.
mm.
Plus, as you can see from something like the Beggar's Opera, there's a lot of people out there sort of sniffing or even laughing at Italian
Laughing,
opera
yeah.
and the kind of ludicrousness of it. And so it does. You can see the bank balances start to go down
Mm,
the tubes, and it's at that point that Handel, who is always um, you know commercially savvy as well as this prodigious artistic talent, realizes that actually, do you know what? I can do opera in English, but I'll call it oratorio, and I'll give
mm,
them what the English want choruses, and you don't get choruses in Italian opera, except that at the end everyone comes on and sings together, and it feels like chorus, but it's really just the principals, all
mm,
just singing simultaneously. So he invents this kind of format which really buys into what the English want, which are these big choral celebrations. But when you look at them, a lot of those oratorios, and you can see from the fact that many of them are staged these
mm,
days. I mean, I've seen many performances of Saul staged,
mm,
Jephthah staged, Theodora staged. I mean, they're intense,
mm,
emotional dramas. And so you can literally just stage them. And then once you realize that, you kind of go, oh, so what is oratorio? It's just opera in English with lots of extra choruses. But it possesses almost exactly the same things. Funnily enough, one of the few that you can't really stage, I think, is Judas Maccabeus, which is which is one of the operas that
you'll
we'll be
see, yeah.
hearing. I mean, for all of its extraordinary musical, I mean, it's one of the most musically inventive oratorios that he wrote, with these fabulous arias for which are divided up between bizarrely two characters, both sung by women, usually the Israelitish man and the Israelite woman, and they sing all these fabulous things, but they're not. It's not dramatically. It doesn't lend itself to a dramatic treatment.
Mm,
So it's one of the few that I think I've never seen anyone attempt to stage it. But most of the other
mm.
oratorios are now often staged.
But in that sense, that I'm immediately am connecting that back to what you said at the beginning, which is if he's someone who has this ability to hone in on characterization through his use of melody, then I can see how if you render it down to that and that alone, then if you have those major the principals on stage and you stage a version rather than, yeah, an actor production, I can see how that would carry through the
Yeah.
power of the characterization.
Yes, and Handel's singers were often the same for the oratorios as they were for the cast that he's using in the
Hmm.
last Italian operas is almost the same as the cast he's using for the first English oratorios. It's interesting actually because when you read about what people write about these performers, on the whole, they're going well. Vocally, they're phenomenal. But dramatically, they're often described as less than. I mean, Senesino is essentially described as wooden, unable to kind of and also I mean the castrati were often described as physically unusual, these
Mm.
strange sort of
Yeah.
massive sort of people, and Cuzzoni, who was the soprano, one of his top sopranos, again is described as small, dumpy, and plain. It's kind of like, and yet she's singing Cleopatra in the first performance of whatever kind of thing. These sort of sirens. So people
Mm.
forgave all of that, it would appear, in exchange for the extraordinary vocals.
Mm.
If you stick them in an oratorio, it doesn't matter at all because it doesn't matter what your singer looks like in an oratorio.
Yeah. And I did wonder about how people responded and received these works when because I was looking at your program, the other work that you'll see performed, which we haven't mentioned yet, is L'Allegro, il Penseroso ed il
Yes.
Moderato. The pastoral ode was how I found it described, or quasi oratorio, so inspired by poems by Milton. Can you tell us, so he's inventing Handel's inventing an entire thing, a new genre in that work.
Yeah, I think Joe. We don't know because we don't have the letters or our
Mm.
party conversations. But Handel obviously had an interest in Milton's poetry. You can see it because he writes Samson from Samson Agonistes, the Milton poem there. So he clearly had an enthusiasm for Milton's poetry. The idea of taking two poems by Milton, L'Allegro and Il Penseroso, the happy man and the thoughtful man, and he somehow between him and his and the guy who pulled it all together, the idea of then writing, it was, I think it was Charles Jennens who was the Messiah librettist, um, uh, binding it together with something called Il Moderato. And it's
Yeah.
really interesting because we're going into the Enlightenment here, coming out of the Baroque and
Yeah.
going into the. It's almost like this is the Enlightenment idea of there's and of course the L'Allegro gets all the best arias, all the sort of jolly joyous arias. Il Penseroso gets the more reflective arias. What they're wanting is something that the perfect combination of that is Il Moderato, which is the
Mm.
moderation in everything, man. So someone who can enjoy both sides of that in a kind of rational,
Mm.
constructed way. And what's one of the reasons I think you almost don't hear it because it's stunning music. But one of the reasons I think you don't hear it is people assume it's in Italian, but it's not. It's entirely in English, and it has. I mean, I jotted down some of the arias. It has fabulous arias, and they have. There's Mirth admit me of your crew, Sweet bird that shuns the noise of folly, populous cities please me then, which is full of all this, the hum of busy men, all this kind of stuff, and this extraordinary aria, which is I'll to the well-trod stage anon, if Johnson's learned sock be on, which is basically saying I'll go to the opera if it's as funny as Ben Johnson's plays, kind of thing. Which is, but if Johnson's
Great.
learned stock be on, I think it's such a fabulous expression.
That's
Which is, but
fantastic.
again, I mean, it's this wonderful text in
Mm.
English by one of England's greatest poets.
Lurking under a complicated Italian title.
Yes, yeah, and it's got one of the most fabulous bird arias. One of those ones with
Mm.
flutes and imitation
Mm.
bird songs. Yeah, well, it's a really really joyous. It's hunting choruses and all of this sort of stuff
Mm.
goes on in it. And I can't think why we don't hear it apart from the fact that people are afraid that it's going to be in Italian, but it's
Mm.
not.
I remember when you were working on this tour with us that you said to one of my colleagues that many of the works that you'll be hearing specifically on your program for your tour are rarely performed in Australia. And I did wonder why that is so. Why do we hear less? I know it's a very big question, but why would we hear less of his work when it's so inventive and so varied?
I think. Well, I think one of the reasons you hear little of it in Australia is it's not always, and it's the same in England. It's not suited to the big opera houses and the big opera companies. These were works that were written to be performed in 800 seat theatres max, kind of
Right.
thing, sometimes less. So, and there's relatively small orchestras.
Mm,
Although they don't sound it in when they're in an appropriately sized theatre. So they don't suit the national opera companies.
right.
Covent Garden have started doing them now, but Covent Garden's not huge as a space. And Opera Australia did do them, but they sort of
Mhm.
fell out of love with them, and that's
Mm,
why I think people like Pinchgut
mm,
do them so well. But Pinchgut really only do I mean, they do two operas a year, but because
mm,
they're eclectic in their choices, you'll often hear something that you've never heard of before from Pinchgut,
mm.
plus a Handel opera, and there are 42 Handel operas. So and I
There's a lot
adore
to choose
Erin
from.
Hilliard. Yes, but Erin could do a Handel opera every year and be dead before he's finished the canon. And I don't wish that on him, but it's
No.
kind of like so there are pieces which you won't hear very often.
Yeah.
I doubt anyone has seen a production of Giustino, for example.
Yeah, and you mentioned venues, and that's on my list of things to ask you about with respect to your festival. But before I do that, Charlotte, who's attending tonight, has done something that I should have told you you could all do, which is you're all welcome to use the chat function to send through a question. And Charlotte has sent a question through that is good to ask now, Clive. It's a question about oratorio. She's asked if it's more expensive to produce and stage when compared to Italian opera.
No, I think is the answer to that because you don't have to have any scenery. Italian
Mm,
opera, a lot of Italian opera was one of the other things people went to Italian opera for was spectacle and stage
mm,
machinery. So there was a cost associated with that, and to some degrees, when you read about the people who are going, you do feel some of them are going for what they will see on stage and the sort of it is the people who go to big expensive musicals now that they want their money's
yeah.
worth in terms of what they're actually going to see. In oratorio, you don't have to do that. It's a really interesting question, Charlotte, because I'm going to look into this, but I'm just trying to think where the singers for the choruses came in these things. I'd be very interested to know because I can't imagine that Handel is paying them a vast amount of money
Mm,
to provide the choruses for oratorios. I mean, otherwise the cost of the orchestra and the soloists will be pretty much the same. And
same.
oratorios ran for 5 to 8 performances in the same way that the operas
Mm,
did.
mhm,
So, in terms of the financial outlay, you presumably you save on all the set and costumes, and you have a cost for a chorus, but I'm not quite sure how much money would have gone on choral singers. That is something I'll have a look at actually, because I'm now curious about that.
yeah, and I'm curious about whether it was commercially successful. Did he, in finding that new kind of medium for English language opera in its purest form, let's say, did that find commercial success?
Yes, it did, and more so, it became something very, very defining
Mm,
in terms of Handel. So even though after Handel's death, you virtually see no Handel opera, not until the 20th century. Just the Italian opera just disappears completely, but the oratorios continue to be formed, and there's Messiah is performed, had unbroken all the way through
yeah.
to now, and oratorios like Judas Maccabeus. Those also stay in the repertoire. Partially, but I think because there's a they gain a sort of almost a patriotic thing in England. It's fascinating when you look at they obviously also have a toehold in Europe. When you look at the
Mm,
Messiah, for example, Mozart rearranges Messiah for an orchestra with clarinets and trombones and things like that, because it's felt that Handel's orchestration is now tired and out of fashion, and that it can be just gussied up with a bit of extra orchestral firepower. And you can see that in England, it goes from being something like the Dublin Messiah, which is very small forces,
Mm,
to by the middle of the Victorian
mm,
period, 800 singers at the Crystal Palace and a
mm,
vast orchestra in order to kind of
mm,
give you that thing. But the Brits really buy into that, and it ties in the Hallelujah chorus, remains. It's not necessarily a religious thing. It's something you all stand up for, like the king. When the king arrives, or whatever kind of thing, and it's the same with Judas Maccabeus, which has the aria, the chorus, "See the conquering hero comes," which is a tune everybody knows.
mm,
Interestingly, not written for Judas Maccabeus. It was actually written for Joshua the following year, and it's not in the first performance of Judas Maccabeus. But having it been such a hit in Joshua the following year, which isn't such a strong oratorio in terms of the sheer brilliance of the kind of aria writing that goes with it, Handel always one to spot the value of recycling something. Thinks, you know what? When we revive Judas Maccabeus, I'm going to stick "See the Conquering Hero" in because it comes in
it
exactly the
fits.
right place.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need something like that in it anyway. There's a victory. We'll have that. We'll have that chorus. So he dumps it into there, and so everybody thinks "See the Conquering Hero" comes from that oratorio when strictly speaking it doesn't.
That's so efficient, though, to find ways to reuse one's own work.
He is brilliant at that. And of course, the other thing that becomes apparent if you start to really dig into it is what, because people have started rediscovering all of these operas
Mm,
from that period, you find that on occasions Handel is not averse to literally stealing someone else's aria if he thinks it's good. And the only reason we don't know he did that, well, first of all, if you're doing like in Hamburg, where he's working for Reinhard Kaiser, who's one of the most imaginative, but also thorough reprobate in other respects, his music disappears from the record of history almost completely. And when we rediscover that in the late 20th century, people go, "Oh, isn't that the same tune that Handel uses?" And Handel was there in Hamburg for a year or so, and you kind of go, "Okay." But he's also brilliant at taking, the Italian cantatas that he writes while he's in Italy for solo voice
mm,
things, yeah, or for two female voice duets. He reuses those all the way through his career. Even in the 1740s, he's not averse to plucking a good tune out of something that he wrote in 30, 40 years earlier and repurposing it to that. And his genius is that he makes it work. It never feels like he's just
mm,
shoehorned something in. He
mm,
repurposes it in a meaningful way and
mm,
sometimes makes sufficient changes to it to make it
mm.
work differently. But
Yeah, that's
you see
artistry,
that in
isn't it?
Messiah. There's in Messiah there
Mm,
are a couple of choruses which are which literally are taken from those Italian cantatas with the words totally changed. But that's where they come from.
mm. Yeah, when you mentioned that one of the reasons his work might not be staged more often in Australia, at least, is due to the specific needs of the venues, the kind of music he was writing in the venues that's best heard in. And I was quite struck when looking at the tour itinerary of the variety of venues that you have on the tour, despite it being, Halle is not a particularly large town. I think I saw it has
Yeah.
200,000 inhabitants, so there are larger Saxon towns, and it's not too far from Leipzig, so there are bigger centers nearby. But even in that small town, you've got concerts in cathedrals, in churches, in modern theatres, outdoors, if memory serves. There might be an outdoor concert in a beautiful 19th century theatre in a nearby town. For you, when you're on tour, what's the benefit, do you think, for you and for the group in hearing music performed in such varied venues?
Well, I mean, the first one is I think Handel always responds well to being in a smaller venue. I mean, it just simply because of the forces involved. So the opportunity to hear Baroque opera in small theatres, I think is, and that I guess is the reason why you don't hear it that often in Australia, is there aren't
Mm,
those small theatres.
mm,
The most Australian theatres were built in the 19th century when theatres were expanding to take on board larger numbers of people. I mean, the place I'm most interested in hearing an opera in, because I've not visited it before, is the Goethe Theatre,
yeah.
which was actually designed built on Goethe's designs of simplicity and functionality and all of this kind of stuff. That I think will be a really interesting experience for us to hear. I mean, the
Yeah.
oratorios, interestingly, were often performed in theatres in Handel's time. That the idea of them becoming churchy things comes a little bit later, and
Mm,
that I think is when, because if you think about it, nearly every Handel opera, I can't think of a Handel opera that was put on in the during Handel's lifetime in which Handel was not directly involved. It's not
mm,
like people are going, "Oh, there's this fabulous Handel opera and we're in Manchester. Let's put it on here," or whatever kind of thing. It always feels very kind of hands-on. What happens after that is with particularly with the oratorios, is you get this feeling that there's a choral society in Leeds, or there's a choral society in Birmingham, and they want something to do, and handles exactly the kind of stuff which is challenging, substantive, all of this kind of stuff. So that I think is when, and they want to perform in big spaces, so they tend to move it into those religious spaces,
mm.
into cathedrals and churches.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect that I hadn't considered. I'm keeping my eye on the time, Clive, because I always run over. And I'm just letting everyone know we always aim to kind of talk for about an hour. So don't forget to send questions through in the chat if you have them, and I will endeavour to keep my eye on that. There's a question there's a comment from Andrew in the Q&A, just noting that Pinch Cup performed Giustino in 2023, which I
Oh, there
missed,
you go.
Andrew. So that's that's frustrating. But that's great to know, and I guess that goes to a lot of the things that you've just been saying about venue size and choices in terms of productions. But just keeping my eye on the time, and also keeping my eye on the Q&A and the chat. I think you've already, I mean, people here like Andrew and Charlotte know what it's like to travel with you already, but for those who are listening along, I think you're giving an idea of what it's like to experience a festival like this together with an expert like yourself. But how do you, when you take a group to like a festival tour like this, you've led our Aix-en-Provence festival tour, you're leading it again this year. What kind of rhythm do you like to create at a festival where you're staying in the one place over, 8 or 9 nights? How does an ideal day unfold for you at something like this festival?
Look, I think the reason I do these things is because I'm passionate about the music that we're hearing, and the reason that I like to do a tour with people is because I like to share that
Mm,
experience with other people who enjoy what it is that I enjoy, and I may have been enjoying it, yeah, for longer, or on a in a sort of the role of a professional critic or whatever
mm,
kind of thing.
mm,
But at the same time, I think the more time I get to spend with people, I always say after I've given a talk, I've learned more about what I was talking about than I ever have before. And you do you
so
you
true.
spend this time with a group of enthusiastic people, and it starts at breakfast. I'm always fascinated who will be my breakfast buddy at the because there's always someone who's up as early as I am, kind of thing. And so you do spend that time talking to people or whatever kind of thing. And I'm also, as I'm sure Charlotte and Andrew will know, often the last person to leave the post-show drinks table, which is always a fascinating experience because
Mm,
particularly, and I think this will be very much the case with the Handel opera. Very, very rarely do you see Handel opera performed as it would have been performed in terms
mm,
of costumes or direction or whatever kind of
mm,
thing. These operas a little bit like the works of Shakespeare. They're very broad. There are many ways you can find into it. If you take an opera like Ariadante, which is, I think, meant to be set in some kind of medieval Scotland. Yeah, I've never seen it set in a medieval Scotland. It's usually they usually find either something timeless or something contemporary, or they'll find they'll a director has a lot of scope to explore
Mm,
in these pieces, and they are that makes them really rich for kind of these feedback sessions. I
mm,
love the post show discussion because it's really interesting to see the breadth of reaction
mm,
to these, particularly the productions in terms of who got it, who didn't get it. And sometimes I feel my job is to try and, particularly if you know something's coming, to kind of get a sense of kind of going, okay, this could
mm,
be. This could be confronting, but I do understand this. Yeah, this is there are lots of ways into an opera like that.
mm,
I mean, Ariadante is a good case in point. I recently saw a production at the Royal Opera, which went about as far in terms of the sort of distressing dark aspect of it. I mean, essentially, like Vivaldi's what's it called? It begins with a G. It'll come to me in a moment. It's one of these operas where a woman is accused of infidelity, and it's a case of
mm,
mistaken identity or duplicitous behavior on the part of the
mm,
bad guy, kind of thing. So the opera becomes a lot about the suffering of both the person who believes she's been unfaithful and the woman who's been accused of infidelity. And that can go into a very dark place. And a
mm,
lot of directors these days, you see that when people stage Jephthah, for example, which is in which a father
yeah.
says he'll sacrifice the first person he sees when he comes back, if he comes back victorious, and he finds his own daughter, and the
Right.
daughter submits
Mm,
to that, but the
yeah.
wife can't understand it. At the end of it, when the angel comes down and redeems it all, and well, that family ain't going to function normally after that, are they? Kind of. And the same thing, it's like when Ariadante discovers that Ginevra is faithful, and that he's been deceived, etc. Kind of thing. The opera is you're all meant to breathe a sigh of relief and everyone lives happily ever after, but that can seldom be the
Mm,
way these things are going to go. So how a director
mm,
chooses to handle that at the end of the piece is
mm.
always kind of interesting. And this one I
Yeah.
saw went about as far as you could go. In fact, so much so that I couldn't go with it. I thought I just thought it missed so many marks in terms of
Mm.
mostly because there was a lot of self-harming and all this kind of stuff was going on, and it was quite kind of, oh, I don't think I
Really
so
dark.
there's no the music has no self-harming in it, but
Mm.
excuse
Yeah. What a good
me.
point. Because you're listening and watching at the same time usually
Yeah.
at these things. So yeah, there can be a
I mean,
disjunction.
there is a very interesting. There's the big aria in Ariadante, Scherza in Fida, is actually a really interesting aria because actually a lot of things could go in that. It's incredibly, it's almost glacial, and it's just
Mm,
you feel there's this sort of pulsing as the person is just exploring this terrible, the terrible place in which they're in this long drawn out exploration of emotional turmoil, which is not there's no the music has no turmoil, but you
mm,
feel it's it's they almost lie on top of this sort of
mm.
bed. It's kind of going tick 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 underneath the person's awakening horror, really.
Yes, the psyche. It's we always know from your fit because of course we always ask people what their experiences are like on tour, and we know that, on all the tours, the pre-performance talks that are, a little more structured usually, people always respond to those because they give the context for the history of the work, but also for how they'll see it staged this evening, kind of thing. But we know on your tours that the post-performance drinks are something that are really appreciated by the people in the group because of the way they allow them to, yeah, make sense of impressions and also I think it must be true for a festival tour, but you tell me. It must also allow for a kind of a thread of the experience to build, not just each individual isolated performance, but also how the festival is unfolding and how people are placing the work into what they know and understand and appreciate of Handel overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's Handel, I think, is very interesting because not just because his life story is quite interesting in itself, because of the kind of variety in it, but also because he represents this extraordinary cross pan-European sort of thing. You know, he's at the heart of what it is to be an opera composer at the very height of the Baroque, and so it's not just about Handel's life, but about the whole milieu in which he's
Mm,
operating. From the his time in Hamburg, which was very formative for him. You know, and he could have gone down that path and ended up being a probably the most successful Italian opera composer in Germany, like Hasse or one of those composers who didn't never really travelled outside of that. And so it is worth thinking a lot about the tours he must have gone on to recruit singers. His yeah the just what's it like to travel from Halle to
mm,
Naples in a
mm.
coach. It's
Yeah.
kind of and when you arrive there, your mission is to chat up the highest status castrato on the in the circuit and persuade them to make the same journey all the way back, plus a sea voyage over to London.
It's
And I do
amazing,
find, I
isn't
mean,
it?
the lives of those singers are also worth. I mean, Anastasia Robinson, who sings in a lot of Handel operas. She was a mezzo-soprano contralto. She becomes a duchess, which is it's that's what you could look forward to if you were a female singer, as long as you kept the men who wanted to hear you sing at sufficient distance, they might eventually become so enamored of you that they would marry you, and then you could get out of the profession before your voice decayed. The men usually ended up having to go off and teach because their
Mm,
voices went. Or if you were Farinelli, you got
mm,
this strange request to come and sing for the King of Spain every
mm,
night, and you end up enormously wealthy, but in this very strange little bubble um,
mm,
in a part of Europe, which is not known for was not known. Spain in those days was not known for its Baroque opera. They had their own very very specific sort of form of zarzuela, which is
mm.
kind of like Baroque opera but with castanets.
We'll have to get you back to speak about Spanish Baroque music traditions. But while you were
I
talking,
love
I
it.
was thinking of the parallels with the biographies and the careers of Baroque visual artists, artists from the same period. I was always struck by Artemisia Gentileschi getting on a boat in Naples and sailing over to England by herself to, paint things in the Queen's house with her dad and her brother. So there's this extraordinary kind of hardiness. You think about them as the genius in the attic, pumping out the work, but they're very, as you've said, commercially savvy and also kind of hardy people as well. Andrew sent through another comment saying that his favorite debrief commentary and robust debate was the one that occurred with you after Louise in X, and he
Oh,
feels
yes.
that Charlotte would agree, he said.
Yes. No, I mean that was a very confronting treatment of an opera which you never see done. I mean it's and when you
Mm,
look at it, you can see why you never see it done. And I did think Olivier P, who is a very fine European director, actually honed in on what is weird about Louise, which is the relationship between the father and the daughter. and put his finger completely on what must be going wrong in that family, but took it to the extreme. So the whole
Right.
opera became an exploration of her trauma, um,
Mm,
where otherwise it's a very romantic thing about a young girl leaving home with with her dream guy who lives in the house
mm,
opposite, kind of thing. So yeah, it was fascinating. The fact
mm.
that her dream guy was actually a dream, and we all learned at the end that he was her doctor administering electrotherapy to her as a victim of abuse from her father
Father.
it was pretty far out. I
Yeah.
would just say, just for sorry, I was just Googling because I
No.
was sure Pinchgut hadn't done Handel's Giustino, and they didn't. They did Legrenzi's Giustino, which is a classic example of an opera going from one composer to another. I have never seen Giustino. It was done last year at the Royal Opera House, and no one paid for me to go and review it, so I never got to see it. But there's I know it through Vivaldi's Giustino, which is the same. It's exactly the same story. It's one of those very
Intricate.
odd stories in a sense, and I'd be fascinated to know how they do it. I do see that there's a puppet group on it because there is he does rescue the princess from a bear. She's being pursued by a bear at the beginning, and later on he has to rescue someone else from a sea monster. So I'm kind of thinking,
That's good scope.
yeah, there it is, and puppets may be the way to go on that.
Are there any other, I'm keeping my eye on the time. We have talked about pretty much every work that you'll be hearing by Handel on the tour. Is there anything else like that where you think, like with just Justino, where you think the puppets might bring in an unexpected kind of surprising angle? Is there anything that surprised you in the musical program?
Well, I mean, the magical operas, Rinaldo is probably Handel's arch magical opera. There are sirens, there are monsters, there has to be some way in which, I mean, there's a boy's own adventure element to it. Um, and so I think you have to think of some way of doing all of that extraordinary sort of magical delusion that goes on within a piece like that. Justino also, I think, falls into that category. Ariadante is there is nothing in there which says um, which says you need to do anything other than just explore this very painful journey that these five or six people go through. Similarly, Agrippina, in almost a completely opposite sense, Agrippina, I love Agrippina. Agrippina it's has that fabulously amoral thing. The heroine is an arch scheming manipulator, and at the end, she gets exactly what she wanted. With her
Excellent.
ghastly son Nerone, who she takes away from Poppaea, the woman that he thinks he wants, kind of thing, in order to get. Yeah, he's. I mean, it's a fabulous sort of. It's kind of I Claudius the opera, but a little bit more like Carry On I Claudius the opera, if you know what I mean. I mean, Agrippina's way of seducing she's so Agrippina was actually Claudius's niece who he married. Don't ask me why he thought that was a suitable thing to do, but and she brought with her Nero, a son by a previous marriage. So he's a stepson, and she wants Nero to succeed Claudius. And to do that, she needs to seduce Claudius's two sort of right hand men, Pallas and I can't remember the other one's name now. Palante and anyway, they're a couple of grifters really, and she wraps them around her little finger in order to get what she wants. And the rivalry between Agrippina and Poppaea, who she thinks is doing her son no favors, is wonderful because for all Poppaea's cleverness, she's nowhere near as clever as
Clever as
Agrippina.
Agrippina.
Yeah.
How fabulous. Sometimes you want the villainess to get her
Yes.
own way.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting because, of course, the other opera that does exactly the same thing is the Coronation of Poppaea, in which
Mm,
Poppaea is seen as the arch manipulator who gets what she wants, and Nero wraps Nero around her little finger, and Nero kills his tutor Seneca. I mean, Nero, in fact, killed his mother. In If you listen to Suetonius, Agrippina first of all survived the deliberately collapsing bed trick, which which Nero attempted to eliminate her by having her bed collapse on her, and she then there's then the sinking ship from which she swims ashore. Only to be murdered on the beach, kind of thing. So it is. She's a resourceful woman, but in the end, her resourcefulness runs out. But not in Agrippina. She goes from
Perfect.
confident schemer to victorious
You can't
schemer.
keep you can't keep a bad woman down,
You
clearly.
can't.
And are there any other works on the program that you've said there's one or two that you haven't seen before? Is there anything you're particularly looking forward to, a kind of a personal highlight?
Um, Look, I know I have seen it before, but Agrippina I just find so delightful. It will always be one of the ones. I just think you've got there's so much scope for humor, but also she does go through an interesting emotional journey. There are points at which she feels like she's not going to get what she's
Mm,
hoping to achieve, and so done well. I think that the character of Agrippina is a really interesting one to explore. So there is that. Ariadante, I just think, is such a strong plot in terms of and really it can be really heartbreaking. So I
mm,
think that's something that I think Radamisto, that's one that I've not seen staged before, and so I'm kind of interested in that.
mm,
It has beautiful, beautiful music, and a story that is a little bit obscure in terms of in terms of its historical backstory. It's and that interestingly is conducted by Benjamin Bale, who anyone who knows Arco in Australia, the Australian Romantic Classical Orchestra, he's one of
mm,
their co-founders.
mm.
So I'm hoping I might twist his arm and get him to come and talk to us at some point about.
It's nice to have that connection in the festival program.
Yes,
Well,
yeah.
if there are no more questions, although Charlotte is asking you, will there be any bears in Halle? If there are no other questions or comments in the chat, then I would just say thank you so much, Clive. It was really great to take a journey through Handel's music with you. And I think as I go off and prepare dinner, I'm going to have to make a little tour playlist and
No,
experience the
absolutely. No,
works.
but I always do a playlist before the tour anyway. And there's so much. Yeah, yeah. It's and that's another. I mean, people talk about Baroque music. It is easy listening in some respects. It's
Mm,
not, there's not it's not angsty or turmoily. It can be
mm.
very, very nice while you're making your dinner.
Yes, well, I wish you then the rest of your morning with a similar kind of light touch for the one that you've given us at the end of our day. Thank you so much, Clive. It was lovely
You're
to
welcome.
talk to you, and
Thank you.
thank you to those of you who came along, and thanks to those of you who sent through your questions and comments. Thank you, everyone. Good night.